holidays. Again, thank you for joining. I know I don't know about you all, but I'm itching for the weekend and the holidays. So looking forward to share some new things today and might even have some fun demoing some brand new data that actually came out today. So couldn't even make it into the webinar slides, but um, since I can since we can have a little fun today, I was thinking I'd demo it for you all. So as always, this is our monthly webinar for last month's results. We're going to be just a reminder. I'm going to tell everyone what a program evaluation system is. We'll walk through student demand, employment, current indicators. We have a program of the month, which we'll walk through and talk about how you can evaluate a program with all of this data in one place. And then Ken will summarize all of the highlights for this month. And if there are questions or anyone would like to look at a program or anything, I'm sure we'll have time to do that. So I do encourage you to participate and ask questions as we go through. So let me change my screen. Here we go. So what is a program evaluation system? We believe that we created a complete version of this, working with institutions such as yourselves over the last decade, really. And what we've done is hopefully brought together the data in a platform for institutions to make data-informed decisions. And we think there's 4 key pieces to this. Well, actually 5, 6, if you consider people and process. But the first and foremost is mission. And mission is critical to your institution because you're most likely not a for-profit institution. And mission is a critical piece to why you are an institution. So we always like to keep that front and center and understand that program decisions should always have the lens of the mission of the institution. Next is academic standards. More recently, I've been calling this academic metrics because that's really what it is. What measures do you have internally that you can keep track of how a program is performing to your standards? And that's where the academic standards comes from. Margins is looking at the direct instructional economics of programs. How much revenue are each of your programs bringing in? How much revenue or how much does it cost to deliver that program? And there's some very key items here, which is actually building this type of model all the way down to the student and section level, because if students don't actually really care what major they're in, as long as they're meeting their requirements to graduate, they could be taking courses all over the institution. And so doing it down at that level is very important to get a true view of what's it costs you to deliver that program and how much revenue is coming in for that program. And all in that so that you can really support your mission. And so it's a really critical piece to keep in mind. And then the fourth piece is getting an external benchmark of what's going on in the market and how does that compare to your internal trends so that you can understand what students are interested in from student demand perspective, what employers are looking for, and who you're competing with. So getting that external market intelligence information to help you make more informed decisions and really be able to ask the question, is it me or is it the market? I'm experiencing growth. Am I experiencing more, less? I'm experiencing decline. Am I experiencing more or less? So again, having that external benchmark. All of this we wrap around with people and process, because you can have all the data you want, but if you don't have a way to leverage it and use it in an ongoing process, it becomes pretty much useless. So again, that's kind of what we believe is a complete program evaluation system. What we talk about today is the external market data. And we think there's 4 pieces to the puzzle, continuing on the fours. First is student demand, employment, then we have competition and degree fit. And we'll get into all of those throughout this session today. So again, student demand, we look at a number of data sources. Again, if you're familiar with us, we try to collect multiple data sources in each section because all data has strengths, but they also all have their frailties. So you want to be able to pull multiple data sources so that you can really triangulate around what's going on in the market. And again, when things are all pointing in the same direction, you should be pretty confident. If they're not pointing the same direction, maybe you're a little uncertain. And so again, having multiple perspectives, again, we believe is very important. So starting with student demand, we have collected data looking at the life cycle of a student. If you think about them actually completing a program, that's the IPEDS completions data, and making a decision maybe 2, 3, 4 years plus years ago, but they actually voted with their feet, completed the program. Very comprehensive, but also limited in its future look just because of the nature of looking at a backwards looking data set. So we wanted to get more current information. And so we're working with up to the most recent term that has been reported. And I'll actually, again, show you, as I mentioned, I'd love to just show you the most recent data that we have for the fall data that just came out. And then we also like to get an idea of what's going on from a more future perspective, looking at Google search trends and what's being searched more, how are those growing? So then you can identify potentially programs that are more emerging or just will feed into that enrollment and then ultimately graduate funnel. So one of the best things that just happened is releasing the 2022 IPEDS completions data. This was released at the end of September, a little bit later than they usually do. They usually say around June, but we work with what we can get. From then, Gray does a lot to make sure that the data is as usable as possible. And as I mentioned, all of the data is, has strengths, but they also all have frailties. Some of the frailties, when you start looking at the completions data, not just looking at it from a historical view perspective, but is also being able to align it across many years. And over the years, taxonomies have changed, zip codes have changed. And so we do a lot of work to make sure that when you're looking at the newest taxonomy, you can look at the historical trends and all of the program data that's relevant is aligning. So we align everything from a taxonomy perspective, not just from a zip code, but also from a unit ID perspective. You would be surprised at how much unit IDs change over time. And so we've done the work to make sure all of those align as well. Some other things that we do here is just understanding that where things are being reported for degree completion versus transfer, and understanding that they're very similar types of programs. And so we combine similar types of programs so that we're not missing anything when we're looking at a particular program. We're not missing some other competitor that reported in a different zip code that is almost indistinguishable, right? They either have the same outcomes in terms of a potential from an employment perspective, or we went to their website and we compared the two programs and they're basically the same, or they are the same, they're just reported in different zip codes. And then another one was STEM designations. There's been a big shift from things like reporting completions in economics to reporting completions into econometrics. While the program is exactly the same, because of the STEM designation, there's just been a shift in where institutions are reporting it. So those are just some examples of how we've been working up to this point to get the 2022 completions data up to par, or at least up to our standards. So what happened over the last in the most recent year? And we're looking at bachelor's and above data, and we can see that total completions, conferred degrees, rose 1%. So not down, which is good, and we're seeing an actual 1% growth there. And this is from 2017 to 2022. From 2021 to 2022, it's actually about flat. And but the overall trend is still up. One other big area that we've spent a lot of time on is estimating online completions. And so if you're familiar with the completions data, they don't actually tell you how many completers were online. For the institutions that are 100% online, you can obviously identify that. But for institutions that have both modalities, they don't provide that. So we've spent a lot of time to make sure that we can estimate as closely as we can to what the actuals are for online completions. And what we've seen is, although this blip in 2021, which a lot of institutions reported their programs online because of the pandemic, there's still a big uptick. And even if we remove 2021 out of here, we're seeing 10% growth in online completions from 2017. So overall completions are growing about 1% bachelor's and above. And we're seeing an estimate that online is continuing to grow even faster. All right, so that means vice versa for on ground, we're estimating is actually declining. So again, when you're looking at your own graduate trends, having this data to be able to say, okay, am I growing at this rate? Am I declining at this rate? Now, this is just a high level. What we're going to see is things differ drastically at the program level. So let's take a look at the top fastest growing programs in 2022. And what we see here, this is the bachelor's only. And the top growing program grew 13%, and that was cybersecurity information assurance. And other thing we can see is we've also highlighted that these are also growing in enrollment, but some of the other programs up here: research and experimental psychology, public health, neuroscience, business analytics. We're obviously going to see analytics come up and a bunch of other sources as well. Aero and astro and space engineering, cinematography, and audiology, computer science, and health services. So these are, again, some of the fastest growing bachelor's programs year over year in the most recent completions data. So let's also then look at master's. And the fastest growing program is data analytics, grew 22% more graduates in 2022 versus 2021. We also have business analytics. So analytics seems to be, obviously coming up in multiple flavors. We have cybersecurity at 19%, and then you can see the remaining here. Again, we've highlighted here to show you how some of these things will point in the same direction across data sources, and the power really comes to play when we look at the scorecard and you can see all the data sources all in one place. We wanted to show you one thing that we've noticed is this whole online completion competitors in 2022, and just showing you the sheer size of some of these institutions and how 35% of the completions only come from 10 schools. So again, I don't think this is a huge surprise to many people, but there are very large online institutions, whereas the average across all institutions for online completions is 100, or the median, I'm sorry, is 100. You see some of these institutions have over 10,000 online graduates, all the way up to Western Governors that had 43,000 online graduates. I did want to also show you from a different perspective than we usually do. We usually show median and average program size for on-ground programs, but I wanted to also illustrate the size of some of these online programs, looking at the average for bachelor's degrees. And so the largest bachelor's degree program is registered nursing. I think we all could have guessed that. RN to BSN is a huge online program. And then you can see some of the other, and so the average is about 109 graduates. So it's obviously pretty large program. Following that, business administration, corrections, psychology, here's cybersecurity, computer programming, and even information sciences. So these are the largest by average program size at the bachelor's degree. And then at the master's level, I almost expected nursing to also be at the top, but was surprised to see social work at the top. So the largest in terms of an average program size, the master's degree is social work. So MSW. We then have MBA, and then here comes nursing with family practice nurse and registered nursing MSN. Some of the other interesting ones to highlight here: data modeling, computer science, applied behavioral analysis, marriage and family therapy counseling. And you can see the range here, a little bit closer of a range for the top programs from what we saw in the bachelor's level, where nursing just outpaced a lot of them. All right, so we did a focus on the 2022 completions because that just came out, but I do want to back into now the enrollment data, which is what's been going on in the most recent full academic year. And so we're looking at trends for total enrollment, in this case, new student enrollment, and we can see new student enrollment's pretty flat, actually, at the bachelor's level, down 0.3%, so less than 1% in the academic year 2022 versus the prior academic year. And at the master's level, actually, new student enrollment actually declined 7%. But one thing I do want to show us is some of the more recent trends now that we literally just launched the fall term data today. So here's a live look at the enrollment dashboard. Right now, I just picked the fall term. And as you can see, we're now starting off collecting data for what we're considering new academic year. So this is the fall 2023 data. So I'm just going to select the fall data. When I select that, I can then see the volume. Obviously, bachelor's is the largest by far. But let's look at the year-over-year unit growth. And actually, over in fall 2023, associate's, undergraduate certificate, and postmaster's certificate all grew. Now, this, I think, is a fix of what we saw in fall 2022 versus fall 2021, where we saw associates and undergraduate certificates decline. So it kind of now started from a lower base from 2022, but is now growing in the most recent year. So that's a unit growth, and then we can see the percentage growth here. And postmaster's certificate, undergraduate certificate, and associates, again, all grew. So that's total enrollment. Why don't we look at it from a 2-digit zip code perspective? Some of the largest, and I do want to select bachelor's degree just to show us that. Some of the largest in terms of total enrollment, architecture and related services grew 7%, computer and information sciences, transportation, science. So we can start to even dig into these and show you some of the programs that are growing. And here are the, again, total enrollment growth trends for fall 2022 versus the prior year. And it's been a pretty steady growth rate for computer and information sciences. We can then drill down even further. Some of the top growing in this 2-digit zip code is computer programming, computer and information tech admin. And so let's take one step even further. One thing that I've been seeing here, this one's pretty interesting. On a percentage basis, human-centered tech design is the fastest growing from a percentage basis. And then if we switch to unit growth, computer science is just massive, and it's also growing. Well, there are 14,946 new or total enrolled in computer science prior in 2023 versus 2022. After that, cybersecurity. So computer science and cybersecurity are kind of leading this area in terms of growth. So just wanted to show you some of the newest data. This is readily available. So when you log into your GrayDI hub, you'll be able to access this most recent information. Right, so let's go back into presentation. So we just looked at the most recent data, so I'm actually going to skip through some of this, but this is, again, you'll have some of these slides. This is a looking at the comparing academic year to academic year. And in this case, we're comparing 2022, 2023 to 2018, 2019. Cybersecurity was growing, comparing those two academic years. And as we saw in the most recent fall data, it's still growing. And then this is look at the master's level. This is business analytics, 25% growth over that period, 2022 versus 2018. So what's going on in the most recent kind of a more future look in terms of what students are searching for? And we can see for the tens of thousands of keywords we're tracking for over 900 programs, which actually covers over 90% of US completion. So it kind of gives you an idea. We're really covering a lot of the bulk of the volume of graduates when we're looking at these 900 programs. We can see that searches actually grew 20% in November. All right, so that's actually one of the biggest percentage growths we've seen in the most recent year. The only other one that came close was in September. But again, big uptick and actually flat month over month, where November is typically, down. It's actually pretty surprising to see that searches are just slightly down from the prior month as well. Here's a look at the average cost per click. So is it getting more expensive to bid on keywords related to programs in Google? Yes, it is. Cost per click is going up 9%. So if you're thinking about maybe you're in marketing or you work with marketing, just understanding that the cost to promote programs or promote your institution most likely going up versus last year. And that's one of the use cases of this, is to understand, can I put together a budget, or what's an appropriate budget, knowing what the average cost per click is for these keywords that we're tracking in our database. And then here are the highest 10 highest program searches. Business administration, registered nursing, cybersecurity were the top 3. And then we can also look at the fastest growing. Not surprising when I see this, especially with all of the AI buzz that's even grown faster in the last few months. Well, we're seeing that program searches related to artificial intelligence are also growing. That grew 173%. Fashion merchandising, that's an interesting one. Wouldn't expect that to be a huge, fast growing area. Some other areas, human resource, digital marketing, so 2 flavors of marketing at the top here, sport and fitness administration, divinity, and substance abuse round out the top. So you can get an idea of what's kind of a future demand for these programs, give you a first indicator of that. Another area we like to, we have a data on is international student demand. And so we partner with a company, Study Portals, to collect their metadata. And what they do is they provide an index of thousands of programs online, so that students can look, identify, and compare programs that they'd like to take in the US. And so we're actually showing you international student interest in the United States, in US programs. And what we've seen is a huge uptick in the most recent year compared to last year, 41% year over year uptick in searches. Now, there's a couple of caveats to this. They are obviously a for-profit company, and so they could also be promoting their programs. Institutions could be promoting more. And so what it's showing us is that overall, there's more traffic of potential international students looking at programs in the US. And again, take that for what it is. Also very similar to the Google search data. When there's more marketing then students are going to be stimulated to search more. So a lot of these have that little layer of stimulation of the market. Some of the top programs in terms of growth, human-centered human-computer interaction. Again, that showed up in one of our top growing programs in terms of enrollment, mechanical engineering, mechanical technology, electrical and computer engineering. And so you can kind of see, if you're looking at expanding internationally, you can start to see what programs are more in demand from an international perspective. And one thing I will say to you looking at this data is it differs a lot by country. So whether you have a presence in India versus versus the United Kingdom versus Germany or Nepal, I would look at those specifically, and you might want to focus on different programs for that. Here's an example. We pulled human computer interaction, and the number one country for searches was India. And then for the programs that have this type of, where the location of the programs, whether they take it online or actually come here, you can see where the destination of those programs are. And California was the largest for that. The last one I'll mention is another future kind of view of what students are interested in is in this non-degree demand. So there's a bunch of offerings and platforms that offer this type of education. One that we spend a lot of time just looking at the data for is Coursera. There's a lot of good reasons for that, because they're actually a little bit more strict on what kind of programs are actually available on their system coming from institutions such as yourselves. So we'll look at the Coursera data, but that's not to say that there's other sources out there for looking at what students are interested in. And so from a category level, the top enrolled categories in Coursera are business, computer science, data science, life sciences, personal development are the top 5. And so you can start to get an understanding of when someone wants to learn about something and they might not want to fully dive into a full degree program, what are those subject areas, and do you have those already? Can you design a certificate around those, or in a non-degree program, because you already know there's a demand out here, you might have the resources and can turn that into a revenue generating type of opportunity. When you start to get into the details of these categories, you can really see what is driving those areas. And here's just a comparison of looking at humanities and personal development to computer and data science. Now, the science of well-being was one of the number 1 enrolled courses on Coursera of all time. So that obviously drives this area up a lot. But if you look over at the computer and data science, look how many different subject areas there are, and you can kind of see that there's a lot of different areas that you can touch on within this category. And versus personal development, there's a couple or a few programs that are really driving the enrollment in that case. All right. So next, I want to talk to you about some of the current indicators in employment. One thing that we've spent a lot of time on is to understand the relationship from an academic program to the job market. And so we've studied a few different sources. One of the main sources we studied was the American Community Survey, which is basically the long form of the census. From that data, we studied millions of records to say what program did a person graduate from, and then what job did they get. And we looked at what jobs did they get, beginning of career, mid-career, end of career. We then compared that to the National Center of Education Statistics crosswalk from zip code to SOC code, which basically tells you what the government believes is what students are being directly prepared to do, which is great. And that they have something like that. But what we know is that not all students are going to do what they're being prepared to do. And so what we found is actually 77% of programs place in less than 20% of their graduates in direct prep jobs. So that means 77% of programs had 80% of their students go into fields that weren't directly linked based on the NCES crosswalk. So if you're looking at employment data and you're looking at just the occupations that the government says, you might be missing 80% of the opportunity for your graduates. And if you're missing that 80% of the opportunity, how might you be missing the opportunity to prepare them for those other fields that they might go into? So we have some examples of this. Here's an example of looking at the international business and trade majors. If we look at the NCS crosswalk, there's 4 occupation codes linked to international business and trade. Business operations specialists, all other, business teachers, post-secondary, chief executives, which can be a little bit misleading. It's anything from even just executive leadership level, not just CEOs. Includes C-suite, presidents, principals, and owners. So just keep that in mind whenever you see chief executives. And then general.
We got a quick question.
Yeah.
This data is for undergrad programs, right? I wonder if the number would be lower if you factored out accredited professional programs.
We do have, yes, I believe that would be the case, and we can actually we have the data to show you, not readily available now, but if you have something you'd like us to show you the outcomes for a particular program that you have in mind, we can absolutely show you that. So if you would like to reach out, we can do that, or maybe let me see if I can pull that up at the end of this call. But I agree with you. I do believe the direct prep is a little bit more relevant at the higher levels, but it's not always the case, and we can show you that as well. Thank you. So what happens in reality? These graduates, there's actually going to 688 different occupations, not just the 4 that were identified for them. Some of them you do see on here, the match. We have chief executives, general and operations managers, but we also have marketing, sales, finance, project management, advertising, computer occupations. So again, if you're just looking at the potential outcomes based on the direct prep crosswalk, you might be missing a lot of opportunity for your graduates, and who knows if that can help inform different curriculum or interdisciplinary programs that you can offer to make your graduates as prepared as they can be for the employment, for the job market. Another example here is looking at healthcare administration graduates. This is at the master's level. I know this isn't an accredited professional program necessarily, but you would think that if you're getting a master's in healthcare administration, that you might go in to be healthcare, healthcare manager. And in some cases that is, but not always. And they go into 633 different occupations. We do have health services managers at the top, so that's good. We do have executives, which could also be in the healthcare space. Managers also could be in the healthcare space, but we have management analysts, marketing managers, computer occupations, and admin services and managers. So again, these other occupations might be relevant, or it may not be directly linked, but they're going to be relevant, and you should be looking at the data for these occupations as well. So what are the most recent trends? In November, we saw a decline in job postings of 10% versus the prior year. I continue to hear the reports coming out about the economy that are getting better. And as you hear that, that means there's less job openings out. And so this actually does align with what we're seeing from the economic reports from the government. So there's, again, another thing to keep in mind, 10% year over year. Some of the fastest growing occupations, though, So even though we're seeing a decline overall, there are occupations that are growing. And here's a look at for bachelor's and above related occupations: social and community service managers, preschool teachers, substance abuse counselors, actually executive level um, is growing. If we think about maybe now that baby boomers might be retiring, there might be that need for the executive level jobs, right? And so this be an indication of that here. And some of the other things we noticed that there are 5 of the top 10, so half of the programs are social work related. And then looking at some of the top skills that were posted in the most recent month of November: litigation support, overcoming objections. I just wanted to clarify what this meant. And if you think about from a sales perspective, if you're going to a sales job, it's actually a skill that they list in a being a sales rep, for example. Government contracting, event planning, key performance indicators, and you can see, so those are the top fastest growing skills mentioned in job postings. All right, so that kind of rounds up the updates for this month. And so I'd like to jump into the program of the month. So one thing that you can do with a system that pulls all this data in together is you
Zach,
can,
let me interrupt you
yeah,
real quick. We got one more question. We often hear so much about how STEM and growing STEM, given the last slide that showed the fastest growing occupations, it didn't seem that STEM was present. Am I interpreting that correctly? Any comments on that?
yeah. So let's take a look. So you're saying STEM necessarily from a occupation, from a job posting growth. Yeah, we're not seeing a lot here, right? But from a program growth, from a student demand perspective, we're seeing the growth there. So the other thing is this is just the fastest growing. If we looked at the top occupations, they might be related to STEM just because they're not the fastest growing relative to what we see. So it could be something that we can also look into at the end of this call. But
Zach,
good
could that
observation.
also be if, say, STEM was just always fast growing? You wouldn't see a giant spike because it consistently is always just growing massively, correct?
Right. It's also most likely feeding into, if we just look at some of the largest occupations, they might just be large and not be able to meet these higher percentages of growth, especially because we're seeing a decline in 10% growth overall. It's a good point. Might not just make the fastest growing, it might make the largest growing, and we don't have that slide readily available, but we can always take a look at that. Right. So we're going to look at a master's level program. As I mentioned, if you can bring all this data together, one thing that you can do is obviously sort on each individual metric. Say you had the total number of completions for masters for every single zip code nationally or in your market. Yeah, we can absolutely sort on that. Say you had the number of enrolled students for every zip code. Yeah, we could sort on that too and say, okay, what are the largest? What are the fastest growing? One helpful way to do this is if you design a way to kind of mesh all of those together. And so we actually designed a weighting system. So you could say, maybe I want to put weight in certain areas, whether that's student demand, competition, employment, or degree fit, right? And so some institutions we work with, competition's uh, a good thing. If they see a lot of competition, they can usually come in and compete really well with a new program. Other institutions need to, be a little bit more careful about competition. So that's one of the bigger areas where we can see differences from institution to institution. From the student demand and job perspective, we always find that institutions do prioritize student demand just as much as employment. And again, another reason why we have that part of our system. So if you create a weighting system, you can look at from a high level to say, hey, where should I even start? This isn't necessarily the answer, but where should I even start from a perspective of identifying high potential programs? The program that we're going to look at for this month is occupational therapy. So here's the student demand perspective from the scorecard. We're looking at Google search data. We're looking at new student enrollment data. And from a Google search perspective, there were 87,990 searches. One of our biggest pet peeves is if someone gives us data, we always ask the question, what does that data point mean? And I can't tell you how many reports I've seen where they just report the number of completions and you're like, okay, well, what do I do with that? Or if you have Google search data, they report the number of searches. Okay, what do I do with that? So we built a way to say, how does Google search compare to every other program? Basically saying, let me get a column of every single program and then sort it. And then just tell me where on that list occupational therapy falls. In this case, it's the 91st percentile. So it's in the top 9% of programs based on Google searches. All right. So the way to read these is to say, yes, I know the value, but what's more important is the comparison for me in this case. The comparison is saying, what percentile is it in? And then the percentiles are compared to the color system as well. But if you can't see the color, we can use the percentile. So 91st percentile for Google search. New student, there was 7,000 new students enrolled in the most recent 12-month period, or the most recent 3 terms versus the prior month 3 terms. So there's a large new students. And we can then also look at growth rates. So in this case, we're looking at completions volume, year-over-year change, and that grew 6%. And that 6% is related to these completions, which majority of them are on ground, 6,911. And we're estimating there's only 181 students that are graduating from an online version of this program. And Google search grew 2%, and new student enrollment declined 15%. So there's a little bit of a mixed message here between growth rates from sources. So I'm not as confident with what's going on, although 2 of them are saying growth. Right. And again, so overall, large program area, majority of these are in the 90s. Not as big of an online program, that's an 87th percentile. And then growth rates are a little bit mixed at this moment. Here's the employment section. And again, this employment data in this employment section of our scorecard is now using our methodology, taking into account what students actually do with their degree. We turn this into 2 different viewpoints. One viewpoint is what do they do within the first 4 years after graduation? And then the other is what do they do after the 4 years? And so it's an entry versus post-entry as we're explaining it. In this case, there's a lot of job opportunities for these graduates, right? So these are all of the size of entry are in the top 2% for master's programs. We also look at what percent of these graduates go into jobs they're not directly, that may not need the degree that they acquired. In this case, 15% of the students who graduate with a master's in occupational therapy go into occupations that don't need a master's degree. It's basically what we're saying here. Now that 15% compared to all other master's programs is very low. So this is actually pretty good. It's in the 2 percentile. It's a good thing. Then we can look at what's going on from a growth rate for these occupations that they're being they're entering into in the first 4 years. What are the growth rates? In the most recent year, that declined 4.7%. Over the 3-year period, it was up 2%. So just the most recent year declined. And then BLS is projecting, and for these occupations related to this, a 1.5% growth annually over the next 10 years. The average or the median wage for these graduates is 84,000. Puts it about average 43 percentile. And so we can kind of understand that there's a lot of job. Students are actually going into jobs that require their degree, but the wages are about average with an 84,000 wage at the median wage. There's a question about, given that occupational therapy is on ground mostly and requires clinical education rotations. Yeah, it's not surprising that there's low interest from an international perspective. Great point. Good observation. Absolutely. Let me see. Correct. Yeah. So you just point out, if you're looking at healthcare programs and you're not as concerned with the international interest in this system, you can actually just say, I don't want to score that at all. I don't want to weight it. And so that's what this NS is here. We're actually not weighting it at all here. And those are decisions that you can make depending on the type of level, program area. You can say, I don't care about international, or you might want an international demand focused scoring rubric. And you say, I want to identify programs that I can go internationally with. Okay, so competition. Let's check time here, coming up on the end here. So competition for occupational therapy scores in the 95th percentile. So again, this is one of the areas where it's like, oh, well, is 95% good or bad? Well, in this case, we always wanted to make the percentiles or the color coding system high, or green is good, red is not good. So there's a little bit of a switch in how you think about, is a higher percentile for competition good or bad? In this case, we're saying it's more favorable. It's favorable in this case. There's 161 graduate campuses with graduates, institutions with online program are only 9. So again, this is not very much. This is again illustrating that this is an on-ground program. The average and median program size, 37 for the median. That's in the top 1% of master's degree programs. So although there's a lot of competition, the programs that are out there are large. And so I like to think of that as the balance of volume versus saturation. Yes, there is a high volume of competition, but it's not saturated in the fact that the program size opportunity is still there. One of the other best examples of this is business administration, one of the most competitive programs, but also a program that you're going to offer because it is also a program that everyone, it's high in demand. So the saturation, although there's a high volume, is lower than other programs because you can still have the opportunity for program size. Some other area, well, this and the median for this is actually growing. So that would again illustrate that it's not yet, it's not a saturated market from the student demand perspective and competition perspective. But it is expensive to bid on these keywords. So if you're going to bid on do programmatic promoting, this is a little bit more expensive in the top 10%, $16 per click in this case. Again, we said lows online for this program. The last area is degree fit. And this is basically the last, or one of the first or last indicators to say, are we offering this program at the right level from a student demand perspective, but also an employment perspective? And the occupations that these students that are directly related to this program, 35% of them require a bachelor's, 53% require a master's. And this is the educational attainment of the workforce, a snapshot, which is usually a lagging indicator to degrees, basically saying that, yes, we're in the right area for this program. It should be offered at a master's level. And the bachelor's level, from a student demand perspective, I think the degree for this one, in this case, is either a master's or even doctoral, but still some at the bachelor's level. And then we also pull in the demographics so you can understand from the IPEDS completions definition of demographics for gender. 90% of the graduates in this program are female. And then we can see the ethnicity or demographics, and we can see 70% are well. So are white, are white. So this is an area where it's heavily white female. Right. So this can help inform you of, okay, if we're thinking about this program, we might need to be a little bit more cautious, or just understanding that this is the typical student nationally. You might want to narrow that down to your market. And just so you're informed about it. I know I work with institutions where they create marketing material to include more demographics so that everyone can see themselves in that type of program. And this one might be one that you really do want to focus that area if that's your goal. Yeah. So where the power comes in is having all of this in one place. Again, we started to show you some of the linkages between some of the data sources in the previous slides. But in some cases, you just want to have a one-page snapshot. And again, or not again, but what we always see when we first see this is like, wow, look how much data there is. Where do I even start? The first time I start working with institutions, or we do as Gray DI, the first one takes 30 minutes to get through. The next one takes 15, next one takes 10, because we've designed it in a way that hopefully allows you to interpret the data, albeit a lot of data, from the summary level to the overall score, to the summary level at the each individual category, but also the context of each value, all on the same page. So in summary, we looked at the brand new completions data from 2017 to 2022. They bachelor's and above completions grew 1%. We saw our online estimates are growing 10% over that same time period. Some of the fastest growing programs at the bachelor's level is cybersecurity, and that has continued to trend that way. I think it was one of the highest in 2021, maybe one of the highest in 2020. So it continues to grow. At the master's level, data analytics and data science grew 22%. And I'm sure we're not as shocked to see that. Enrollment, cybersecurity wins again, surprising, or not necessarily surprisingly, but to see it in both, some of the fastest growing in both enrollment and completions, again, will tell us that it might still be the fastest growing in 2023 completions. Business analytics grew 25% at the master's level. So again, lots of the same trends over the last few years. Google searches grew 20% year over year, and artificial intelligence program keywords grew 173%. We talked about labor market data and the linkage between programs and occupations, understanding that, yes, students are being prepared for a particular job in some cases, but that doesn't mean that they can't take everything that they've learned and apply it in other jobs. And we know that because we've studied that and see that in the evidence. And then we looked at the occupational therapy program, and we saw that it's a strong demand program. We're not as sure about what's going on from the growth rates. We saw a 15% decline in new student enrollment, but the other two indicators were growing. So I'd just keep a watch out for that. Employment opportunities were strong, and but the median wages were about average. And but one good note about this is it's a large program opportunity, and that program size is growing, telling us that there's still opportunity in this program. It's not saturated because that median program size is growing. All right, so that rounds up our monthly update. We have our one of our favorite webinars, one of our audience's favorite webinars, because it's always one of the most attended webinars we do, is the 5 emerging academic programs for 2024. So we will go through in detail 5 programs that don't show up well in the data because they're that emerging. And we do additional research to say, find evidence of these programs are coming into play. That is happening on Thursday, January 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And I hope you all join that so you can learn what programs make the list. As far as our normal monthly webinars, we have Wednesday, January 24th and Thursday, January 25th for our community colleges, and then also for bachelor's and above. And as a reminder, we do have a book out on how you use data and having a data-informed approach to managing your program portfolio. Again, as I go back to the beginning when I was explaining the program evaluation system and bringing all the pieces together, having all the external market data, having your internal data, bring it all together so you can be as informed as possible about the decisions you're making as an institution. And then the final thing I'll mention for today is our Grow, Grow, Grow podcast, which our CEO, Bob Atkins, is interviewing and just talking and discussing different strategies education leaders such as yourself are using and identifying that are working to help their enrollment. And so there's a lot of different strategies, very interesting what people, what's worked out there and what hasn't worked. And so if you're interested, we have these resources here as well. So, are there any other?
Have a happy holidays, and thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Happy holidays.